Generations come and generations go. The sun rises and the sun sets, and then it hastens to the place where it rises again. The wind blows to the south, the wind blows to the north, and on its circuit the wind returns. What has been is what will be, and what has been done is what will be done. And there is nothing new under the sun. Our generations before us have left a legacy that we can be proud of, a legacy for us to remember. My name is Arthur A. Harder. I am the third sibling of George N. Harder and Maria Wall Harder. For a number of years, I have had a burning desire to find my roots. My mother died when I was just a teenager. I have many memories of the stories she told, when in the evening we would look at some old photographs she had brought from Russia. I, however, had many other interests. Today, as I reflect on those moments, I have regrets. I have numerous unanswered questions. And why did I not ask? With the help of Mother's pictures, the reading of biographies and autobiographies, reading Russian history and Mennonite history, I have tried to put the wall puzzle together. There are many pieces of this puzzle missing, and they will always remain a mystery. A few years ago, a big part of the wall puzzle was found. The children of Aunt Catherine and Uncle Ivan Kostenko, who we thought had perished during the Russian Revolution and the famine, were found alive in Russia and in the Ukraine. With this marvelous discovery, the wall puzzle has become just a little more complete. The year is 2001, the new millennium. My roots go back in time some 220 years. I hope that this video will bring life to the generations that have gone before us. This video I dedicate to my mother and my father. My mother was born in 1899 in the Ukraine. She, during very difficult times, smuggled family pictures to Canada. If my parents would have been caught with these pictures, they would have been sent into exile or even faced death by firing squad. As a result of health problems, she died in 1944 in Vineland, Ontario. Peter Wall, Alec's father, had a parchment on which were recorded the names of our ancestors, giving their names, their spouse's name, the date of birth, the date of marriage, and the date of death. This parchment recorded the names of the first generation, 1786, the second generation, 1810, and the third generation, 1832. The fourth generation, 1867. This parchment was beginning to deteriorate, so Alec Wall and the late Bennett, with the help of a local surveyor, restored this parchment, and they also completed the fifth generation, which began 1891. I also dedicate this video to Alec Wall and the late Bennett for their interest and for their desire to record the Wall legacy. We have many questions. Where did our forefathers live? What were the world conditions? What were some of their hardships? And why are we called Mennonites? Menno Simons was born in 1496 in Witmarsum, Friesland. He became a Catholic priest. Europe, as we know it today, was the Holy Roman Empire. In 1517 to 1519, a Reformation took place. Martin Luther, also a Catholic priest, in 1519 nailed his 95 Theses on the door of the All Saints Church in Wittenberg, Germany. Luther denied the supreme power of the Pope. The Anabaptist movement, or the Reformation, was well received by the people, and many Anabaptists were persecuted by the Catholic Church. Menno Simons, also a Catholic priest, denounced the priesthood in 1536, and his followers were known as the Mennonites. This is Witmarsum, where Menno Simons was born. The regions of the northeast of Germany and part of Poland were more tolerant to the Anabaptists. Noblemen who had large estates welcomed a significant number of Mennonites to the Vistula Delta. The Vistula Delta was a very marshy, swampy lowland, which the Mennonites soon turned into a very fertile land. For more than 100 years, the Mennonites in the Vistula Delta flourished. They became merchants, manufacturers, bankers, craftsmen, brewers, and town laborers. They developed a common language, Plattdeutsch. Things changed by 1760. Many of the privileges that they enjoyed were taken away. Religious freedom was curbed. Churches could not be built anymore, and you could not become a citizen of Danzig. In 1772, a portion of Poland was transferred to the sovereignty of the Prussia under the King Frederick the Great. Some religious freedoms were upheld, but economic conditions and restrictions followed. Mennonites could no longer purchase any new land. Catherine II of Russia had at this time defeated the Turks in southern Russia, which today is known as the Ukraine. She needed foreign colonists to settle that new land that she had just conquered. Mennonites in the Vistula Delta were ordered to pay large sums of money to the Prussian government, who was fighting the Napoleonic Wars. In 1786, George Van Trapp was sent by Catherine II to see if the Mennonites would settle in Little Russia, or the Ukraine. And in 1786, a delegation was sent to investigate the land. They were Johann Barsch and Jakob Hepner, and an appointed assistant by the name of Major Meyer. Barsch and Hepner outlined a number of requests which were signed by Catherine II. The first family left Danzig in 1787, despite strong opposition from the local Danzig and Prussian authorities. The immigration that started only as a trickle soon became a stream. As we look, many names of villages found in the Vistula Delta, like Fürstenweder, Petershagen, Orloff, Ladekup, Erwalde, Schweinsee, were also named in the Ukraine colonies, like in Kortitsa as well as in the Mleczna. And some of these names were also carried across the ocean to Western Canada and parts of the United States. The trek from the Vistula Delta was not an easy one. The distance from Danzig to where the settlements were, Kortitsa and Mleczna, that distance was approximately 1,200 miles. About the same distance as from Niagara to Winnipeg. The travel was also dangerous because of many roaming tribes that would plunder these immigrants. The route from Danzig, the first ones were by water to Riga, down a number of rivers and crossed some land, and finally they arrived at Kortitsa. There were, however, some immigrants or colonists that traveled from the Vistula across the land. That was quite a dangerous trip because of roaming tribes. The Kortitsa colony consisted of a number of villages. The first settlers that came to the Kortitsa area settled around Kortitsa and Einlage. Catherine the Great gave 65 desatines of land to each family. 65 desatines is approximately 160 acres. There were also a number of conditions that were signed by Catherine the Great. They had the fishing rights to the Dnieper River. There were no taxes for 10 years. They had the freedom of religion, language, and they could also build their own schools. And there was no quartering of troops in the houses when soldiers were in that area. Each family received a certain amount of money as a loan for starting up their farm, and it was repayable at the end of the harvest. All the land, excuse me, all the land had to be properly surveyed, and the government had to guarantee protection from roaming bands. The hay on the Kortica island was also, the Mennonites could harvest all the hay on that island. And of course, they were exempt from military service. As the first settlers left Danzig in 1789, and many families left after that, the Prussian government imposed an exit tax of 10% of all their assets. The Russian government, to lure new settlers, would give them financial help in the form of interest-free loans. The first settlers that came to Kortica were given 65 desatine of land, and this was free. That land stayed in the family and was always transferred to the oldest in the family. The families were large in those days, and many people became landless people. The Russian government gave the Mennonite settlements permission to establish new areas. The new colonies that were established, they had to pay anywhere from 10 to 50 rubles per desatine. And that is how the Mleczna colony started in 1804. We have numerous names that were in the Vistula Delta. These are the first colonies from Halbstadt, the first 9 villages to be established in the Mleczna colony. The Mleczna colony was approximately 320,000 acres, which was bought by Mennonites from Kortica. They gave them the financial backing. Many of these names we will see and hear about as we continue on with the Wall legacy. This is Tokmak, where the Wall legacy first started. This is the first generation, Cornelius van der Wall and his wife, Frau van der Wall. We have limited information, but he was born in 1786 and died in 1833. And his wife, 1784, and she died in 1839. How many children they had, we don't know, but they had one son, Jacob Wall, It's noteworthy at this point to note that the name Van der Wall was dropped because they wanted to get rid of their Dutch heritage when they came to Russia or to the Ukraine. There was a Jacob Miro and his wife. As we see, he died in First Invader Russia in the Malechna colony. They also had a daughter. We don't know how many they had, how many children, but Renita Miro was born in 1814, and then she married Jacob Wall in 1832. He died in 1856, and then Renita Miro married a Peter Lender, who was born in Danzig, Russia, and it's possible that they knew of the family, and then they were married. Peter Lender and Renita Miro married in 1857. Jacob Wall and Renita Miro had a large family. This is the third generation. Peter Wall was born in 1843 and married Maria Gosen Wall in 1864. We have the first pictures of this family. This is the oldest photograph that we have of Peter Wall and Maria Gosen Wall. This photograph was probably taken approximately 1875. Peter Wall was born in Herschel, Malechna. Maria Gosen Wall was born on the Wintergreen Estate, which was a large estate outside the colony of Malechna. The child that Maria is holding is probably Abram Wall, who was born approximately 1876. This couple had 3 children: Johannes Wall, Jakob Wall, and Abram Wall. Jakob Wall, of course, is our grandfather. Peter Wall died in 1882. Peter Wall left a widow and 3 sons: Johannes Wall, grandfather's older brother, Jakob Wall, and Abram Wall. The gentleman, we don't know who he is. We can assume that this photograph was taken somewhere between 1882 and 1883. This is Maria Gosen Wall, our great-grandmother, Abram Wall, Johannes Wall, and Jakob Wall. The girl, we don't know who she is. It's also interesting to note that photography, as we know it today, really started approximately 1850. And there was a very cumbersome way of taking pictures with large cameras, and it was very expensive, and people who had financial means would be able to have pictures taken by people traveling from village to village or from estate to estate with all this equipment and willing to take a photograph at a certain cost. Maria Gosen Wall had an older brother, Johannes Gosen, and a younger brother, Jakob Gosen. They were part of the Wintergreen Gosens. After her husband Peter Wall died in 1882, she then married a Gerhard Wall in 1883. Gerhard Wall was a cousin to Peter Wall. After the death of Peter Wall, Maria Gosen Wall married Peter Wall, Gerhard Wall, Peter's cousin. We don't know where they lived. Did they live on the Wintergreen estate? We know that Maria Gosen Wall and her second husband, Gerhard Wall, had one son, Gerhard Wall, who was born in 1885 and died in 1886 in Johannesheim, Russia. There is no village by that name, so perhaps we could assume that Johannesheim was a name given to an estate on which they lived. In 1870, 12 delegates were sent to America to inspect the prospects of emigrating. Upon their return, they gave a favorable report. Immigration fever was running high. In 1870, under Tsar Alexander II, the Russian government planned to reform the military establishment with universal conscription. The schools came under Russian jurisdiction, increasing the use of the Russian language. All records in the Volust offices were to be in Russian. With immigration fever running high, the Russian government objected. The government sent General van Totleben to persuade the Mennonites to stay. The Russian government also disallowed shipping companies to pick up immigrants from Russian ports. And this explains the route that the early immigrants had to take. From 1873 to about 1879, some 10,000 Mennonites settled in Kansas, in Nebraska, in the Dakota Territory, and also in Minnesota. The immigrants that came to the United States, they left Antwerp to New York or to Philadelphia. Renita Miro Wall Lender, with her husband, Peter Lender, and two siblings of Renita's first marriage, left the Mleczna colony and settled in Henderson, Nebraska. I think that was the county of York. Renita Miro Wall Lender was grandfather's grandmother. Grandfather's uncle, Johannes Gosen, from the Wintergreen estate, with his family, also left for America. Grandfather, Jacob Wall, was born in 1870 and grew up when this immigration was beginning. It was 20 years later, in 1890, when grandfather and his older brother, Johannes Wall, came to America to visit his grandmother and his uncle. This photograph was taken either in 1889 or 1890 in Nebraska. This is grandfather Wall, his brother Johannes Wall. We don't know all the people on this photograph, but we assume that this is a couple, and this is a couple, and these must be their children. There are two ladies in the front. Now we know that grandfather's grandmother, Renita Miro Wall Lender, was still alive. Her husband, Peter Lender, had died in 1885, and she died, grandfather's grandmother died in 1895 in Henderson, Nebraska. We don't know which one of these is Renita Miro. Is it this one or this one? But we have a picture of the grandmother, which we found. Now, this was taken sometime in Russia, perhaps, or maybe even in Nebraska, we don't know. Is there a likeness? Or is that sort of similar? This little fellow that's in the front, there's a story behind him. He came to Manitoba in 1927. He and his friend heard about Walls living in Manitoba. And so they left, be it Nebraska or Minnesota, wherever, and in search of the Walls in Manitoba. And that's the only address he had. He found the Walls in St. Anne's, Manitoba. these children are probably descendants of Renita Miro Wall's children. Renita Miro Wall Lender, with her husband, her second husband, came to America with two of their children. There was a Cornelius Wall and a Catherine Wall, who married a Jansen. And we don't know if this is Cornelius Wall or is a descendant of the Cornelius Wall that had immigrated to America. I would assume that this is probably the Cornelius Wall who was born in 1841 in Russia, and he came to America and died in 1913 in Henderson. Catherine Wall Jansen moved to Enid, Oklahoma, where she died in 1912. If this is Catherine Wall Jansen, we don't know. This photograph was taken in 1890, in the spring of that year. This is a picture of Jacob Wall and his brother Johannes Wall. And the person on this picture as well is a cousin, and his name is Johannes Wall. That would be possibly a grandson of Renita Miro Wall Lender. On the back of this photograph, it's written in Gothic script. I can't read all of it, but the story that's on the back of this photograph tells about a hunt that these people had gone on a blauen Fluss, which means a blue river, and they were hunting geese. And I've often wondered why my mother had a dog named Ned. This retriever that's on this picture, his name is Ned. This photograph was given to Manya Wall, my mother, in remembrance by her father, Jacob Wall. This photograph was taken in 1910 in Nebraska, America. It's written also in the Gothic script. This is a cousin of Johannes Wall. She is the daughter of Uncle Cornelius Wall. This photograph was taken in 1890 in Henderson, Nebraska, while grandfather visited America. He was 20 years old. As it is written on the back of this photograph, for remembrance to my daughter, Manya, and signed by Jacob Wall. This photograph of Maria Albrecht was taken in the fall of 1867. She was also 20 years of age. Upon grandfather's return from America, Maria Albrecht and Jakob Wall were married November 25th, 1890. They had dreams, they had hope, their hearts were filled with love. Perhaps they thought of the future. Would there be prosperity? Would there be sadness? Or would there be joy? In 1890, the government was stable. The Tsar was in control. But soon, there was unrest and dark clouds were forming on the horizon. They looked into the future with hope and with faith. We have the opportunity, however, to see what their future was really like. We can see how they lived, where they lived, the prosperity they enjoyed. They had 11 children. 2 died in infancy and 1 at a very early age. 8 survived. They had large estates, servants, governess, guards. They had wealth. They had happiness, and they also had sadness. Jacob Wall and Maria Albrecht Wall had 11 children. 2 died in infancy. This is Peter Wall. Anna Wall Entz. And Dietrich Wall, who was born in 1897 and died in 1900. This is Dietrich Wall, one of the sadder moments in grandfather and grandmother's life. Beside grandfather is Peter Wall, and between the grandparents is Anna Wall Entz. This photograph, if we look carefully, we'll see this house later on in some of these some other pictures. It was taken, this photograph was taken in Tokmak, where they lived. After Dietrich Wall, Maria Wall Harder was born. Then Johann Wall, or John Wall, Catherine Wall Kostenko, Jacob Wall, George Wall, and Abram Wall, who died in St. Anne, Manitoba. We don't know when this photograph was taken. We have to make certain assumptions. This is grandfather and grandmother. Grandfather is holding John Wall, who was born in 1900, and grandmother is holding Catherine, and she was born in 1902. So we can assume that this photograph was taken approximately 1903. This is grandfather's older brother, Johannes Wall, and his wife, Catherine. They had twins that died at birth, and they adopted two girls. This is one of their adopted girls, her name is Mary. This is Maria Wall, my mother, born in 1899. And this is Anna Wall, born in 1905. That would make her somewhere around 6 or 7 years of age. And this is Peter Wall, born in 1894. This other child in the front is Jakob Gosen, and he is a brother to Catherine Gosen. And this, of course, is Maria Gosen Wall, grandfather's mother. This is Catherine Gosen. There is no relationship between the wintergreen Gosen and this Gosen family. The other couple we don't know, and we don't know who that lady is either. This picture was taken in July 1907. Grandfather and grandmother. This is Maria Wall, Anna Wall, Catherine, John Wall, Jake Wall, Peter Wall, and this is George Wall. He was born in 1906, so he was approximately a year, or not even a year old at that time. A personal bodyguard that grandfather had, two maids, and the governess. If we look at this photograph and we see the windows, we have a number of those pictures where this shows up with the concrete steps. And if you remember that other picture where Dietrich had died, and that was taken in this vicinity. This photograph was taken the same day as this one. If we look at the house, we can see the windows. Look at the clothes that the children are wearing. The maids. There's Peter Wall with the bike and John Wall standing beside it. And this is grandfather. And the coachman. And of course here is that guard. Again, when we compare these two pictures, you can see that it was taken at the same time. We see the bench over here, and again we have the same bench over here. This was enlarged from a small photograph, slightly distorted, but it still shows what life was like in 1907. Cousin Alfred Kostenko brought this picture to Canada on his last trip. The original photograph was approximately 1.5 by 2.5 inches. We don't know when this photograph was taken, but in this picture here was Catherine, and she cut herself out of this photograph and put that picture into a locket. You can see her skirt and her shoes. She was born in 1902, so, and Uncle Jake Wall, was born in 1903, so he's perhaps a year or so old. So this picture was probably taken in 1905 because George Wall was not born at this time. This is Peter Wall, this is grandfather, Maria Wall, my mother, John Wall, grandmother, Jacob Wall, and Anna Wall Ince. This photograph was taken in 1908. Maria Gosen Wall and her husband, second husband, Garrett Wall, were celebrating their 25th anniversary. This picture was taken at the large ranch, which consisted of some 5,000 acres. And the front row, this is Maria Wall, my mother, John Wall, George Wall, Jacob Wall, Catherine, and a John Peters, a son of this couple here. This is a Peters family. This is a Neufeld family. This is Anna Gosen from the Wintergreen estate. This is Malvina, an adopted daughter of Johannes Wall and his wife Catherine. Peter Wall, grandfather. Anna Wall, this of course is grandmother. This is Maria Gosen, and this is a Maria Wall, the other adopted daughter of Johannes and Catherine Wall. This is Jacob Gosen and his wife, Agneta. They were the Wintergreen Gosen. This, of course, is Johannes Wall and his wife Catherine. This is Helena Gosen. We'll hear a lot about her a little later on. And this is Nettie Gosen. The Wintergreen Gosen, they had several daughters. From this picture and from the previous pictures, we have seen the Wall family, their children, their relatives, some of their relatives, their servants, and their friends. I ask the question, where were these estates? Where was the flour mill? Where was the paper mill? We ask these questions. How did the Mennonites acquire these large estates? Let us look back at history. The Moluchna colony was founded in 1804, and it soon expanded into some 61 villages. A few adventurous and prosperous Mennonite farmers rented vacant land from the government to aid in the sheep rearing, which proved to be a major form of economic endeavor. After 1817, Mennonites were permitted to buy land outside the colony. And this is how some daughter colonies came into being. There were army generals and Russian nobility that received large tracts of land for their service to the government. The owners of these large estates had to hire farm managers. Many were incompetent. And then there were new land reforms, and the abolition of serfdom caused many of these large estates to declare bankruptcy. Many wealthy Mennonite farmers, as well as foreign colonists, purchased these large estates. And from the middle of the 1800s till the beginning of the 1900s, there were between 400 and 500 Mennonite estate owners. Some were large and some were small. These estate owners brought wealth, social status, and power. And such was the case of Grandfather Wall, who had 2 large estates, as well as the Wintergreen Gosen estate. With the aid of this map, and with Alec Wall having visited the Ukraine, and in particular the area around Guliapol and Pologi, we have tried to place where these estates really were. The distance from Guliapol to Pologi is approximately 16 kilometers, and from Pologi to Orikov it's approximately 35 kilometers. Alec, from what his father has told him about these estates, we have tried to establish where they were. We know that the one estate, Katinivka, was approximately 4,000 acres, and it was very close to the village, the Russian village of Pologi. Next to the Katinovka was the estate Maryanovka, which consisted of approximately 6,700 acres. We have converted the land from the desatine to acres. The distance from the frontage of these two properties we have tried to establish at approximately 7 kilometers. Next to Maryanovka was the Wintergreen estate, and we've heard a lot about the Wintergreen estate. It was very large, approximately 30,000 acres. These two estates combined totaled approximately 11,000 acres. So this was, the Wintergreen estate was 2/3 larger. We have tried to establish the distance from one border to the other. It's approximately 18 kilometers. We know from what Alex's father told him that in this area, both on the Wintergreen estate as well as on Maryanovka, there was a lot of sheep raising going on, and this land was not quite as fertile, and furthermore, with these rivers that were at the back of the property, there was plenty of water for the sheep. The other thing that I should mention as well is the Konka River. And the land of all these estates went right up to the river. The paper mill, as far as I understand, was somewhere in this area. It was on Maryanovka, but I believe on the other side of the river. This is the railroad that grandfather built, which we will hear more about later on. You can see the trail that the people used, which sort of crossed a lot of this property. They would go from this Russian village to this one here, and they would have to use this trail because they could not get across the river at all these different points. There were many large Mennonite estates in other parts of Russia, not only around the Molochna area or the Kharkitsa area. This is going west along the Trans-Siberian Railroad, and you can see Mennonite names of estates. The Hildebrand estate, the Heinrichs estate, Johann Peters, Fast, we will hear more of the Trans-Siberian Railroad later on. We have seen the house that the Walls lived in Tokmak, which was very close to the flour mill. This is the house on Maryanovka. We saw part of the front of the house. This is the farm, the house, as well as the farm buildings. Maryanovka was approximately 6,700 acres. They lived here most of the time. When grandfather would go to Tokmak, to the flour mill, he would use that house. And the family would go there as well on vacations or even to live there for periods of time. This is Maryanovka again. The Wall family, some of the Wall family are going to a wedding. And there are a number of boys that are playing. Uncle George mentioned something about being there with some of his brothers as well as some of the children of the workers. This is the only photograph we have of Katinivka, the small estate. I remember when Mother would look at this picture, she would talk about different the buildings, and one thing that has really stuck to my mind is this wagon, which was a herder's wagon or a herder's hut that he would use when he was out in the field tending cattle or sheep. The Walls didn't live in this house for any long periods of time. The other thing that we can see when we bring this photograph, bring the picture up very close, is the garden of all these different trees. Those would be various types of fruit trees. Now this mill, I don't know if it would be used for milling flour or for power. Quite a number of chimneys. Recent map of the area where our grandparents lived. This is Gulyapol, and this is Pologi, Tokmak, and Molochensk, which is Halbstadt. The red line indicates the railroad that grandfather was instrumental in constructing. He didn't construct this railroad all by himself. There was a consortium of investors that invested the money, and he was the president of the railroad, which we will hear more of later on. The green lines indicate the railroads that were built by the Russian government. We know the distance from Gulyapol to Pologi was approximately 16 miles, or 16 kilometers. From these marks here indicate the estates as we thought where they would be. They're sort of drawn out of proportion. The larger estate is the Wintergreen Estate. From this area, from the Wintergreen Estate to which was at that time the Molochna colony, was approximately 30 35 kilometers. And in the book, Daydreams and Nightmares, Helena Gosen, writes about traveling from the Wintergreen Estate to the Shanzay Mennonite Church. Now, they couldn't travel that distance all the time, in the wintertime especially where it was cold, or in spring when the rivers would flood and so on. So they were restricted as to the amount of time that they could go to that church. This is just to show where these different estates and where the homes were. We've seen a picture of the estate Katrinovka and Maryanovka, and now we will see the home that the Walls had in Tokmak. We've seen this photo before. This is the house in the town of Tokmak. This is another view of the house in Tokmak. You can see that it was quite a large home. This is the flour mill in Tokmak. And the Walls, or when grandfather would come to Tokmak to see the operation of the flour mill, he would stay in the house that we just saw. This building is still in Tokmak. It has been partially destroyed. The roof is gone, and Alec Wall has been there, and he has seen the remains of this building. We can see grandfather and a number of his guards. Here again we can see that the horses and the wagon, or the carriage with the driver. These are some of the employees. We will hear more about this photograph later on in the video. This is a winter home that the Walls had in Bryansk, where they would vacation in the wintertime. It was an extremely large home, and looking at this photograph we can see Alec Wall and our cousin Alfred Kostenko. That house is still standing. During the different wars it was occupied by German officers, it was occupied by the KGB, and today numerous Ukrainian families live in this large home. This home, in the time when the Walls were there, was housed with a full staff of butlers and maids, cooks, and they were always ready to serve when people would come, when the Walls would come to stay for a vacation. Perhaps later on in the video, Alec will be able to say a few more things about this home. This is where Uncle Peter, Alec's father, and Alec's mother met in this area. So these are some of the homes and places where our grandparents lived. In 1890, our grandparents were young. Their hearts were filled with hope, love, and ambition. In the early 1900s, they had a large family. They had estates, large homes, flour mill, paper mill, and a desire to construct a much-needed railway system to connect the colonies with the seaports to the south. Our grandparents aged. The youthful look took on an image of maturity, of wealth, and the image of authority. From their stories that have been told, the grandparents always held fast to their faith. Unbeknown to them, this strong faith in just a few years would be put to one of the most severe tests. This photograph was taken in 1909 in Tokmak. This is Maria and Wall, grandfather's mother, with her grandchildren. Uncle Peter, Maria Wall, my mother. This is Catherine. Uncle George, Maria and Wall, Anna Wall, Mrs. Entz, Uncle John Wall, and Jake Wall. On the back of this photograph, it states that it was taken in 1909, but this Uncle George Wall, was born in 1906. So it would appear that this photograph was probably taken in somewhere around 1907. The place is still Tokmak. This photograph, it appears, would be taken at Maryanovka. This is Peter Wall, Anna Wall. This is Helena Gosen. And this is Melvina Wall. She was the adopted daughter of Johannes and Catherine Wall. Helena Gosen is the first cousin to our grandfather. This photograph was taken approximately 1905. The Wall family had just returned from Germany. The Russian-Japanese War was on, and many of the people went to the central part of Europe for safety. This is a photograph of Anna Wall Mrs. Entz, and Maria Wall, my mother. So if this photograph was taken in 1905, approximately, that would make mother approximately 6 years of age. We don't know when this photograph was taken. This is a Miss Ediger. She was the governess. And this is Anna Wall. This is Entz. This is my mother, Maria Wall. This is Catherine. This is Uncle Jake. And this is Uncle John. The governess' job was to teach these two boys some manners. Of course, she would also have to teach reading, writing, and arithmetic. We don't know when this photograph was taken, but it is taken at Tokmak. You can see that bench and the steps again. This is Uncle George, George Wall. He was born in 1906, so this photograph was taken somewhere about 1907. This is the nanny that they had, and this is a photograph of, or picture of Jacob Wall. He seems to be disinterested at this time. This is a photograph of Peter Wall with an unknown gentleman. This photograph was taken approximately 1911 or 1912. A picture of John Wall in a uniform, and he was going to high school. This is a picture of Peter Wall taken just before the First World War. Possibly it was taken at Marianovka. This is a picture of George Wall, and taken approximately 1907 or 1908. He was born in 1906, so he's either 1.5 or 2 years of age. This picture was taken after a party or a play. I don't know if it was taken inside Marianovka or not. This is Peter Wall, Anna Wall Entz, and this is Maria Wall, my mother. The Wall family would visit family and friends. The only form of travel was by carriage. Because of the long distance to travel, usually a team of 2 or 3 horses were used. On this occasion, the Wall family visited the Albrecht estate, that is grandfather's father-in-law. The center carriage is grandfather's. We have no record of where the Albrecht estate was located. And we don't know who the other members, those other carriages, who they belong to. This is a very old photograph. A lot of marks on it, but we can still see what these carriages look like. Notice the fender, the back wheel, the coachman in the front. The wintergreen Gosen usually had white horses. It could be one of their carriages. Grandfather Wall enjoyed music. This was his band. I don't know exactly the circumstances. I don't know when this picture was taken. Notice that on this photograph he did not have a very full beard. The person to grandfather's left was a Mr. Weens, who came to Canada. In 1874, universal conscription became law. Many Mennonites feared that the principle of non-resistance would be compromised, and so they left Russia for America. Those that remained signed an agreement in September 1880. Young men could now serve their military duty in a forestry station. These forestry camps were financed by the Mennonites. They built the barracks, they supplied food and clothing, and ministers for spiritual welfare. The Russian government made the land available. These men planted trees, some built some roads, and some served also in the Red Cross. In peacetime, there were some 1,000 men who served in these camps. The names of those chosen to serve were drawn by lot, usually for a 4-year term. When the First World War broke out, these forestry camps were abandoned. In this photograph, we see one of these barracks and a number of men that served in this forestry camp. This is grandfather, who also had to serve a period of time. We don't know exactly for how long, but he was involved in one of these forestry camps. And I know from my grandfather Harder, he also, even being a teacher, also had to serve in one of these forestry camps for a period of time. As we look closely to this picture, we can see here is a lamppost of some kind. These buildings were built out of stone, and a typical Mennonite building, when it was built, it would be built to last many generations. The year that the United States purchased Alaska and the Aleutian Islands from Russia, Jacob Wall was born in 1870 when the Franco-Russian War broke out. 1873 to 1877, a Great Depression and industrial crisis took place. 1874, military reform. 1877, Tchaikovsky's first opera was performed. In 1881, Alexander II was assassinated. 1891 to 1944, 1891 to 1894, the reign of Alexander III began. In 1890, Maria Albrecht and Jacob Wall were married. In 1891, the Trans-Siberian Railroad was started. 1893, the big industrial boom. And in 1894, the death of Alexander III. 1894 to 1917, the reign of Tsar Nicholas II. And in 1900, the death of Dietrich Wall. In 1905, the Russian-Japanese War. In 1905, again, a general strike. 1906, the First Duma, the Parliament. 1907 to 1912, the Third Duma. And 1912 to 1917, the Fourth Duma. These events took place many miles away. During the Third and Fourth Duma, Russia made great advances in education, arts, family, farming, and industry. From 1890 to about 1915 or 1916, grandfather and grandmother became a large landowner. He had the first flour mill that operated 24 hours a day. He had a paper mill. He also saw the need for a railroad. The Mleczna and Kortica colony and the large estates around them became very successful in growing grain. Soon there was a big surplus. The Mennonites were the first people to export grain to other countries. The grain had to be transported long distances by horse and wagon to the railroad that ran north and south. Grandfather Wall envisioned the need for a railroad system that would replace the horse and wagon. A railway system that would run east and west. This was a large undertaking. The project needed money, it needed the government support, it needed architects, accountants, and shareholders. Grandfather, who initiated the project, became the president. These are the shareholders and the administrators of the railroad that was built at Tokmak. This photograph was taken at Bryansk. The back row, this was Fox, this was at Peters, Klecklar Sr., Kleinart Jr., and Kleinart Sr. This is an Edgar. This is George Wall, stepfather of grandfather. This is Jacob Wall, a Russian inspector, and this is Mamin, which was a representative of the Ministry of Transportation. This was an Edgar, and this is Johannes Wall. Glechlor Jr., Hugo, a representative of the Italian Steamship Company, Ediger, who was the account manager, and Johnson from the administration of the head office. There was a need for railroads in Russia. Many countries, European countries that had access to water, used ships for transportation. Russia being more or less landlocked, had to build a system of railway to move product and to move people. And in 1891, the Russian government started construction on the Trans-Siberian Railroad, which started at Moscow and continued westward, Lake Baikal, along the Chinese-Manchurian border, and then down to Vladivostok, Japanese Sea. In this little corner where you see the Black Sea and Yalta, Kryvyi Rog, it's in this area that a series of railroads were built running north and south. This is the Crimea, and this is one of the railroads that ran north and then there was this railroad that also ran north, and then there was another one over here that ran north. And these railroads all went to Kiev and eventually all the way to Moscow. So these were your north and south railroads. And there was a need for a railroad that would connect these north-south arteries with railroad running east and west. The lower part of this railroad went through the Molotchna colony, and then it connected here, and it went sort of in a northwesterly direction to Zaporozhye. This is Tokmak, and this is the railroad that ran east and west. It also connected from Hauptstadt along the colonies, and then it crossed the Molotchna River, and it hooked up with the artery, the railroad artery running north and south. Many of the Mennonites who left the Ukraine in 1923 and 24 used this railroad and crossed the Molotchna River and hooked up with the north-south railroad, and that's how they went through Russia and into Lithuania and eventually came to Canada. This is one of the many things that my mother brought from the Ukraine. I looked at this book many times and it really didn't mean very much. Everything is written in Russian. I could see pictures of tracks and construction. And it wasn't until a few years ago that our cousin Alfred Kostenko came to Canada and he could explain what these pictures were all about. Many of these things that will see, are still there. Now, this book was printed in 1913. To build a railroad like this, land had to be purchased, land had to be surveyed, bridges had to be constructed. When the actual construction really started, we don't know, but I feel that it would have to be somewhere around 1908, 9, or 10, somewhere around there. This is the railway station at Big Takmak. There are 3 Takmaks. This is one of them. This is a bridge near Poluggy that crosses the Conca River. It's still there today. It is north of Takmak. You look at that construction, it's amazing what they could do so many years ago. This is the railway station near the flour mill in the city of Takmak. This is the bridge that crosses the Malachina River at Lichtenau. This is the bridge that many of our parents and relatives crossed when they came to Canada from the Ukraine. They had to build these bridges very high and long because many of these rivers would flood in springtime. This is the railway near Maryanovka, the estate on which the paper mill was located. These are railway buildings near the village of Hallstatt. This is the area where the railroad runs east and west and another railroad that runs north and south. It's sort of an interchange. This is possibly close to Poluggy, and this is a railroad that runs north and south, and here is a railroad that runs east and west. And this is the area. This railroad bridge is still there. I can't pronounce the name. It's a Russian name. Alfred told us about it, and we'll show you where it is on the map. This is the name right here. My Russian is not very good. From 1890 to 1917, our grandparents achieved numerous goals. They saw government changes. Grandfather had thoughts of leaving Russia for America. Perhaps he had visions of unrest and instability. Grandmother enjoyed her family, her maids, and her luxury. In 1914, World War I began. Russia was at war with Germany till 1917. In 1917, Tsar Nicholas II was overthrown, and the Bolsheviks seized power. Lenin became a dictator. There was civil war. The communists defeated the anti-communists. The Red Army defeated the Russian White Army. And the Russian peasant seized control with terror and with vengeance. Estate owners were shot, imprisoned. Many fled to villages in Malachna. Grandfather and Uncle Peter and Uncle John were captured and imprisoned in Ladakh, near Tokmak. Military court was held each night. Grandfather and his sons were also sentenced to death. But the Ukrainian peasant that worked for Jacob Wall and received flour at no cost rose to the occasion and saved the lives of grandfather and his sons. Grandfather was transferred to a prison in Zaporozhye. He was then transferred back to Ladakh, where he died on March the 6th, 1922, at the age of 52 years. Grandmother and her family sought refuge in the villages of Malachna. In July 1924, she and her family arrived in Canada, settling in St. Anne's, Manitoba. She died March the 5th, 1925, at the age of 58. She had lost her husband 3 years earlier, on March the 6th, 1922. Her youngest son, Abram Wall, died in Manitoba, February 26, 1925. And so the story of hope and love that began in 1890 ended in sadness and in death. They lost all the material possessions, but their faith in God weathered all the storms of life. Doing the Wall legacy has had a profound effect on me, one of great joy and one of much sadness. Through photographs, my ancestors have become alive. The grandparents, whom I have never seen, took on a new dimension. When I saw their achievement, my heart was filled with joy and with pride. My eyes, however, were filled with tears when I saw our ancestors experience sadness, destruction, loss, revolution, and death. What took decades to build, it took a mere few years, or maybe even a few months, to destroy. My parents risked their lives with photographs we have seen. They carried them from the Ukraine to Canada, to Manitoba, to Ontario. They had few possessions. They were hungry. They were poor. They had health problems, and they had stress. They were alone. Their families had already left for Canada. Soon their prayers were answered, and they too could leave their beloved homeland for an unknown Canada. Mother suffered from TB. She spent years at a sanatorium, St. Catharines. In 1935, while in the sanatorium, she went into a coma for many weeks. After she awoke, she related to her family that she had been in a beautiful garden and did not want to leave. She soon realized that she had a family of 4 children to care for. She thanked her God many times for the recovery. She made a commitment to her God to fast every Good Friday, which she did until her death, December 31, 1944. An epilogue is a postscript to a story, an opportunity to make corrections and to make additions. The Dietrich Albrechts our grandmother's parents, lived on the Zandhof estate. Jacob and Maria Wall were married November 25th, 1890, on the Zandhof estate. Zandhof is comprised of two words. Zand means sand. Hof means farm or a farmyard. The location is unknown, possibly somewhere near Pelagi. This wonderful hymn, "So Long My Days is Late," was penned in 1895 when our parents and grandparents lived in the Ukraine. I dedicate this song to my parents and also to my grandparents. My father was the oldest son of a school teacher and a minister. My mother, the daughter of an estate owner, an owner of a flour mill and a paper mill, and the president of the Tokmak Railroad, who grew up many miles from Kleefeld. The revolution, the famine, the terror brought these two people together in a small village of Kleefeld. Mother sang solos in my father's choir. They fell in love, and they were married in Kleefeld, April 22nd, 1924. On November of the same year, they sailed to Canada. She had a family of 4 children, and she died October 29th, 1944, at the age of 45.